Hi everybody, Nick here, and I got a review for you today of a really cool knife, and that's the Chris Reeve Knives Umnumzaan. So, Chris Reeve, talked a lot about his stuff before, makes the Mnandi, which I really like, and the Tylock, which I'm throwing, but I really, really like. This guy has gotten surprising amounts of pocket time for me. And so the Umnumzaan, I figured, you know what, I might as well check out some more of his stuff, and I'm glad I did, because this is a really, really nice knife, probably even a gem, which surprised me. So this is, it's worth saying, this is one of the newer versions of the Tylock. It's got a birth date of March 31st, 2014, and it's got all the newer features. So it's got the new pivot, it's got the Chris Reeve lock bar stabilizer here. I think it's, well, Hinderer, but still. Lock bar stabilizer here, and it's got the Idaho made written there. So this is pretty similar to one that you would find in any given store, which is good. And this is not the Wilson Combat StarTac version, because Wilson Combat, really. But, you know, it's still nice enough and has all the same perks, and S35 steel and whatnot. So, first and foremost, this is a really big knife, just by way of size comparison. So here's your Spyderco Delica. Good. Here's your Chris Reeve Tylock, which is a very small big knife, and you can see the Umnumzaan is pretty freaking huge. Other pretty freaking huge knives in my collection that this compares to, both in function and in form, are your Spyderco PM2 here. So the handle on the Umnumzaan carries a bit smaller because it's not as thick, and your Graham Razel, which is in some ways bigger, but in some ways smaller. It's a little bit thinner, and it carries a little nicer because of the Graham clip. But regardless, it's not a small knife at all. Even compared to the biggest knife in my collection, the Grimsmo Norseman, this is pretty damn big. Very, very, very large knife. Not incredibly so, it's easy to carry, but still, it's big. So keep that one in mind. A couple of things to point out that are interesting about the Umnumzaan before I get into the good, the bad, and the ugly here. First off, instead of a normal detent ball and lock bar, it actually uses a ceramic, and I'm going to see if I can show this to you here. You should be able to see a little bar sticking out here at the very edge of your lock bar, a little ball that is. And that ball is a little ceramic ball, and that serves two purposes. First, the detent, you'll see the big old detent hole there. It drops into there. And second, the ceramic ball is actually what's contacting the blade tang and locking the blade shut. You know, it's interesting and it's new, and I actually kind of like it, but it's very different. It means that there is absolutely no lock stick on this knife, which is always a pleasure, and the detent is nice, so I can't really complain. The other interesting thing is that on the thumb stud here, you got these rubber rings, and those rubber rings make it absolutely silent in operation, which is kind of a nicety, although I can't really say I've ever been in a situation where I need to open my pocket knife silently. But whatever. Adds a nice feel to it. So those are kind of the interesting new features of your Umnumzaan relative to some of your other Chris Reeve knives. And so, yeah, let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right, so there's a lot of goodness about this knife here. First off, it's made in the USA by Chris Reeve Knives, which means you've got their warranty and you've got their disassembly policy. This is a knife that's easy to take apart. You just undo the pivot and undo this screw here, and it's simple to put back together. And they encourage you to do it. They include the tools necessary, and, you know, that's just really nice. And I appreciate that, because I like being able to disassemble my tools. And I love the fact that they're, you know, very happy to have it happen. They even go so far as on their website, they say things like, well, you know, if you can't put it back together, put it in a baggie and send it to us and we'll do it. That's really nice, and I appreciate that they stand behind their products in that particular way. Unlike some manufacturers... Spyderco, looking at you. You need to get on that. Anyways, so I like that a lot. The blade is great. It's S35 VN steel, which I love. It's got a nice hollow grind to it, which makes it a decent enough slicer for its size. The blade's not so thick. It's actually just a little thinner than your PM2 and a little thinner than your Graham Razel, but not quite so thin as, for instance, your Grimsmo Norseman here, which is a fairly thin blade all told. So it's a relatively thin blade, which I like, and makes it a good slicer, even though this is a pretty burly knife, and it's meant to be such. One thing to say, and I can't really capture this on video, is that this is a very smooth knife, and it's that Chris Reeve kind of smooth. A guy on Reddit I like a lot, a guy named Capelin, talked about this being a very hydraulic feeling, and I like that. And that's a good contrast. I'm probably going to do a video on smoothness at some point, but it's a good contrast to the really fall shut kind of smoothness like you get in your Greemsmo Norseman. This isn't just going to fall shut. If you've got it partway open, it's staying there. But it's very, very smooth to close. It's got an objectively nice feel to it. Especially, I'm running some nano oil in there instead of their grease. It's the heavier weight nano oil. I'll probably review that too. But anyways, really just nice feeling there. Speaking of nice feelings, these rubber rings add a nice feel to it. The knife locks shut, but it's different. It's very quiet. Here, listen. You can barely hear it locking shut. Now compare that to your Sleesh Bowie. Very loud lock shut. And even your Norseman locks shut a little bit more loudly than this, but because the stop pin here is effectively damped, it locks shut very quietly, which is nice, and it lends it just a really nice feel. It's a sophisticated feel, if you will, and same thing on this side. It's very quiet to open and shut, and yet it's really, really secure. When I first got it, I'm like, oh shit, it didn't lock, because I couldn't hear it. But it's those rubber rings, and that's kind of nice. And they also feel pretty decent on the finger. So that's good. But the lockup is very secure. I'll say that. I mean, spine whacking, no problems at all. This detent ball is a nice thing. I mean, overall, I'm really impressed with the lockup. The rubber rings are a nice innovation. That's apparently from the Hawk brothers, the same folks who did some of the crazy stuff on your tie lock here. And, you know, it's very, very nice in terms of lockup. It's very secure, and, I mean, honestly, it's a gem in that way. But yeah, mostly it's a simple knife, and it also looks pretty decent. You know, my girlfriend, I, show her my knives and just say, hey, what do you think about this? Because she's a normal human being. She's like, oh, that's not bad. I kind of like that. So that's kind of a nice thing. It's not butt ugly, yet it's still a beater. So that's good. I like that. So that's the good on your tie lock here. It's a Chris Reeve, so you got the great disassembly and warranty policies. The steel is very, very good. The grind is good. It's so smooth, which is really nice. And honestly, the feel of this knife, particularly of the Umnumzaan, is really excellent. With the rubber rings here, the ceramic lockup, it's pretty effortless, and it's really cool in that way. I recommend that you handle one of these guys, particularly one that's been broken in, because it's just unique and interesting, and I kind of like it. So that's good. Now let's talk a little bit about the bad. All right, let's talk about the bad. And there ain't a whole lot of bad here. The Umnumzaan's ergonomics are not incredible. They're not bad, they're not tragic, but there are a lot of hot spots to it. And you really need to learn how to grip this particular knife. For instance, your clip tends to dig into your fingers here, and this little surface right here is pretty sharp on your index finger there. So if I end up keeping this in the long term, I'm probably going to do something about that little surface, round it off a little bit. I wish they'd done that from the factory. So it's not an ergonomically perfect knife. It's no Norseman, it's no Spyderco anything, but it sure as hell isn't the Shabazz 21, which was just an ergonomic train wreck. So, not great, but not terrible either. The swedge and blade design I don't really care for. There's a whole lot going on back here that doesn't need to, and this part is actually almost sharp. I mean, it comes to a very sharp angle. So, that's... Be careful, some states with overzealous dagger laws might have trouble there. The glass breaker, I don't see a whole lot of point to, except for the point right there. No? Okay, whatever. And it just adds pointiness to the knife itself, which it doesn't really need. And the biggest downside of this knife is that it's about $425 new. And that's bad, but it's not ugly, because honestly, I can see $425 here. You've got a lot of new technology. You've got that ceramic ball detent, which is a beautiful thing. No lock stick. You've got these washers, which is really nice. And you've got a knife that's really well designed, really simple, great service and warranty. So yeah. Your Graham Razel Mid-Tech is $375, a little bit below, and actually has a couple of little fit and finish issues, namely lock stick is a big issue, and the lock up not being that deep. It's a very great knife, and functionally it's really good, but fit and finish-wise, it's not quite as good as this guy was. And your Norseman is about $575 now, and it's absolutely perfect. And so I can see this as a middle ground between these two in terms of value. And so, it's not out of line. So it's expensive, and that's going to be a deciding factor for a whole lot of people. But this is not a knife that, had I paid retail, I'd feel ripped off on. You can get them used, though, around $350, $375, and they age really well, and you can send them back to the spa treatment if you need to. So don't hesitate to pick one of these up based on price if you're willing to pay that price. So that's the bad. There's not a whole lot. Let's go into the ugly. So, the ugly. There's only one really ugly thing about this knife, and that's this little bit here. On the lock bar, there's this cutout, very sharp surface, digs into your finger each time you do it. I really think they could have done better than that. It's not a deal breaker by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a design flaw, because it is kind of painful, and I'm not the only person out there complaining about that. So, not ideal, but whatever. On the whole, though, this knife is a gem. And I didn't expect to say that. Of all the things in the world I thought might be gems, I did not think that this was going to be it. I figured I would buy this, I would, sell it shortly after the review where I say, oh, well, it's a nice knife, but it's not really for me. Maybe it is for you, a little expensive. But no, I'm convinced. This is a really, really nicely made knife. And specifically, everything is done very right, except the damn lock bar thing. The steel is good, though, the fit and finish is great, and the action is just pretty incredible. The smoothness coupled with these spacers that make for this really quiet yet solid action is just nice. It's like, and this is a silly analogy, but it's the difference between opening a car door on a cheap car, which tends to be, or closing the car door on a cheap car, which tends to be a very loud and rattly affair, and on a really expensive car where it locks just as tightly, but it's very quiet and subtle. And so that's kind of what it is. So this knife has actually really impressed me, and it might be sticking around in the next Shabazz collection. I don't know for sure yet. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I don't have enough use for it. So what is this knife? That's the harder thing to say, because in many ways this is like your gentleman's beater or something like that. I mean, this is a really beefy knife designed for heavy cutting tasks, but it looks good enough and it's built well enough that you can carry it as a luxury good. So, I don't know what the hell this knife is, honestly. I have trouble with a lot of things, but this is a really, really nice knife. And if this design is appealing to you, if you want to have something with that kind of a felt quality, that kind of simplicity, disassemblability, that's not a word, but whatever, and that's just nicely done, this is something definitely to consider. I'm really, really liking this a whole lot more than I expected to. And I think you might too. It's expensive, sure, and that's going to put it out of the running for a lot of people to start with. But if that's not, if you're a crazy enough human being that you're willing to spend $350, $400 for a knife, and by God, this ain't a bad way to go. So that's the CRK Umnumzaan. It's a gem. I'll say it, and that's a surprising gem. And I think that you're going to enjoy it, because I've sure as hell enjoyed it. And I'll let you know if it sticks around in my world. Hope this has been helpful. Have yourself a great day.